Hello, and welcome to our lecture on the July Days, a series of events which are happening in July 1917. And it's part of our understanding of the events which eventually create a situation that allow the Bolsheviks to seize power when we get to October 1917. The notes that we're using here are the ones that are called the July Days, and we'll work our way through these notes as we follow through the PowerPoint. We've got to remember that while Lenin first came back in April 1917, we've learned that he was not very well received. We've got a picture of him here on the left speaking in those very early days to the Soviet and to members of the different socialist political parties. Even though, however, he did receive that poor reception, he was a very stubborn, persistent man who believed very strongly in his own ideas. And so he spent the next month basically speaking, convincing his fellow Bolsheviks of the correctness of his theory, of the idea that the workers' revolution must come now. And so he did a lot of speaking. And we can see here, while this one on the left is a photograph, this, of course, is a later painting that is showing him speaking to a group of soldiers. It's interesting to note here that we've got Stalin in the background. It gives us a hint as to the period of time at which this particular painting was created. But the very typical pose of Lenin, which we see develop over time in Soviet art and imagery, but it certainly shows what he was doing during 1917. So he's speaking at Bolshevik meetings, he's speaking to the Petrograd Soviet, he's going out to the public and speaking to them, selling his ideas. And it's in that first month that he's really refining his ideas and developing those slogans of bread, land, peace, and all power to the Soviets. Robert Service, one of our historians we've been looking at, says that Lenin was aflame with zeal. Everything he did was undertaken so that the April Theses might become the foundation of Bolshevik revolutionary strategy. Service does very much give Lenin a lot of credit for developing and implementing and really pushing his ideals that led to the Bolshevik Revolution in October. It's important, though, to notice this second sort of line here. Service has noted that Lenin was not inflexible and that he adjusted himself to practical needs by dropping his initial claims and creating slogans that would persuade them to carefully to come over to Bolshevism. So we see already as early as April, May 1917 that Lenin, without diverting from his own ideas, is able to twist them, bend them to a more pragmatic approach, which actually meets the needs of the people. He is very good at that level of flexibility without actually getting rid of his own ideas. At the same time, however, we have to remember that Lenin was not necessarily always going to win. He was not going to always, be the leader of a new revolution. And we need to bear that in mind. And Orlando Figes does that. He suggests that the idea of the Bolshevik Party in 1917 as a monolithic organization, tightly controlled by Lenin, is a myth. And in fact, Lenin had to work very hard to earn his leadership and earn the trust and respect for his ideas. And Orlando Figes tells us that Lenin got his way due to political skills, including persuasion, tactful retreat, and compromise. So Lenin had to work hard to get his ideas across. And we have to remember that he had to work into that position as the leader of the revolution. There was, in fact, another key revolutionary person in Petrograd, Russia, during 1917. And his name, of course, was Leon Trotsky. Now, Trotsky had made it back in May. He'd come all the way from New York, had a few issues on his way, but he makes it back in May, and here he is on the left, arriving by train back in Petrograd. Trotsky was not a Bolshevik. Trotsky was, of course, a Menshevik. Yet, over time, in the last few years, his ideas had actually become very similar to Lenin's. That is, when he comes back to Russia in 1917, he sees the need to push ahead for a workers' revolution straight away. So Trotsky and Lenin are actually having the same ideas of what needs to happen now. That doesn't necessarily mean that they got together straight away. Trotsky wanted to stay a Menshevik. He was loyal to his party, but he wasn't able to attract a very large number of Mensheviks to his ideas. So Trotsky and Lenin meet, they discuss, they share ideas, but Trotsky does not become a member of the Bolsheviks at this point. Okay, so they've got the same ideas, and they will actually start to work together, but Trotsky is not a Bolshevik at this stage. The Bolsheviks, pushing Lenin's ideas now, continue to meet, continue to argue. And we start to see an expansion of the membership of the Bolshevik Party. They are able to attract people to their ideas. So new branches of the Bolshevik Party start to develop. So we've got a strong Bolshevik following now in Moscow, in Kiev, in Rostov, and also at the Kronstadt Naval Base, just to the north of Petrograd. We've got a photograph here of a Bolshevik meeting at Kronstadt itself. By June, the Bolshevik ideas are growing. The numbers in the Bolshevik Party are growing. But we have to remember that the Bolsheviks still do not dominate the Soviet. They're still a minority. There are many more Mensheviks and many more socialist revolutionaries than there are Bolsheviks. And what this means is that Lenin does not have control of the Soviet. The ideas of the Bolsheviks are still different to what the Soviet is voting on. So, for example, while Lenin's calling for mass protests in the street, the Soviet is blocking those ideas and therefore not encouraging their members, the workers and the soldiers out there, to undertake what Lenin wants to happen. And in June 1917, the Congress of Soviets, remember that's the body where all of those different Soviets from around the country get together for the first time in June 1917, the Congress of Soviets actually voted to continue to cooperate with the provisional government. This made Lenin really mad. He was upset, and it's certainly against the ideas that he was pushing. And it's important for us to remember that in June 1917, the Bolsheviks can't get the Soviet to do what they want to do. The Bolsheviks are still a radical minority. So what's happening around in Russia at this time? Well, you might remember that Kerensky had tried to get the army to undertake a very effective offensive, trying to reinstate the status of the army, reinvigorate the army. Yet those offensives, which had taken place down here in Galicia, had very much failed. And the Russian army had been humiliated. What we see happening is mutiny along the Russian line in very large numbers. And here we can see a picture of Russian soldiers actually fleeing from the German army. It's this kind of running away, mutiny. We do see desertions in very large numbers. We start to see officers also being killed. Kerensky is having problems at this stage. Remember, he's still the Minister for War. We're also seeing agrarian anarchy. That is, the countryside is, up in arms because they're not doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. They're seizing land, and soldiers want to get back to their homelands to take a part in that, the land grab that's happening. We're also seeing an increasing number of strikes in Petrograd, and we're getting armed soldiers, actually joining them on the streets. The Russian people are war-weary, and this attempt of the Kerensky offensive to regalvanise interest and support for the army and the war has failed miserably. What happens at this point is that Kerensky is really concerned about the front line. There's so many desertions that he needs to reinforce it. And while he doesn't want to, he feels the need to take troops from Petrograd and place them back on the front line so that the Germans don't just, come straight through and attack the rest of Russia. The troops in Petrograd, however, are very comfortable. They don't want to leave the safety of Petrograd and go up to the front line. And in this mood of desertion and possible mutiny, these soldiers actually refuse to go onto the front line. Instead, they stay in the city. They're armed, but they are now deserters and they are not following orders. We see them actually going out on the streets and now protesting against the provisional government. They're joined by other army and navy deserters who are flocking back to the city. Also, striking workers join the streets, and Petrograd is in chaos. Lenin and the Bolsheviks at this stage consider if the time is ripe for a revolution. And certainly amongst the soldiers, there's a growing number of Bolsheviks, these more radical thinkers who like Lenin's ideas that we want to have the revolution now. But Lenin is actually concerned. He's worried that this popular uprising is out of control. They don't have a plan. The Bolsheviks do not have a plan of what to do next. And so Lenin actually makes the decision not to go ahead with a Bolshevik-supported attempt at a coup to seize power at this stage. Now, if it had been organised, it probably would have been successful. But Lenin backs off because he doesn't appreciate or support this uncontrolled attempt to seize power. But there are a number of Bolshevik-influenced soldiers, sailors, including the Kronstadt sailors, who want a revolution, and they feel the time is now. They actually start not just protests, but seizing control of government buildings. There are mass demonstrations. 500,000 go out onto the streets of Petrograd, and there's rioting taking control. This is what we call the July Days, the unrest of the July Days. Kerensky has to act. He has to bring some control to the situation. And so he orders troops out onto the streets. And we see here, this is a photograph of the Nevsky Prospect in Petrograd. Soldiers are battling each other on the streets. The soldiers that have stayed loyal to the provisional government are shooting the soldiers who have deserted. Some 400 to 500 people are killed or wounded during these times. Eventually, Kerensky and his loyal soldiers are able to bring Petrograd back under control. But it's been at a cost. I'll stop here, and in the next part of this lecture, we'll talk about what this July Days means, the impact of the July Days on the Bolsheviks, and what's going to happen next.